Hello and welcome to this session. We have with us Dr. Richard Straub. He's the founder and president of the Global Peter Drucker Forum. Richard, welcome to the summit.
Thank you. Thank you, Kumaar.
Richard, with the kind of disruption that we have seen in the workspace, certainly the models of management and leadership will go a tremendous shift going forward. Even now, most employees are working from home. And if you speak to some of the largest corporations worldwide and more so in India, they are saying that post-pandemic, they don't think large parts of the workforce will be coming to work every day. And if that were true, what does it mean for future, models of management and leadership?
First of all, I would caution with regard to the changes that are perceived in situations where something exceptional happens, like a new technology is coming in or new methods are being provided that change the way how we can work. So it's true, there are changes, there will be changes, but I'm going always back to Drucker's principle of continuity and change. It is never going to the extreme. It's almost always overestimated in the beginning. And when you take the way how people work in offices or not, it reminds me some experiences I had in my old IBM days when, for example, e-learning was coming up in the late 90s as the new panacea for learning. And in fact, many people were arguing everything is now changing about learning. So it will be e-learning in the future. That's the only future. We know the story. It didn't come exactly this way. And the same was true when even IBM came with the concept of the so-called globally integrated enterprise, where it was about offshoring, right? Putting your workforce in countries where you can best, IBM argued at the time you can get the best skills, but what was behind it is you may also have the lowest cost, right? And that was a big boom, and then you saw the issues coming up, right? It doesn't exactly work this way. And the danger with the subject of new work is also that on people's minds, sometimes even unconsciously, it's very much driven by this idea, wow, now I can save a lot of money. I need less space for the office. I need people will be flying much less, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So I'm saying as the first point, let's be cautious. Whatever the prognostics now are and all the forecasts, they come from the moment, from the initial experience. They don't tell us what is the right new mix. But I would agree that things will change. But the challenge for management is to find the right balance between continuity, having people together, having them building trust as a group, having them being in a different environment, which is often very important. And on the other hand, working from home with other advantages. So that's my fundamental point to it, to caution.
Right. You mentioned something important about how the hype around e-learning initially was sort of sky high. In the current context and going forward, even if work from home doesn't remain at the levels that we think it will, but it is certain almost that there will be increasing amounts of work from home, even post lockdowns. And in that sort of a distributed environment, how does learning and the personal connect and sort of organizational culture, when it comes to learning, how do you think that is going to evolve? Some sort of crystal ball gazing from you here.
I mean, when it comes to learning, I have the tendency to think about experiential learning, right? Experiential learning, which means learning on the job, learning in the project you are in, etc. And experiential learning has, of course, a number of dependencies, and it has quite a number of them are related to the personality. I must be very open to really capturing the learning points. I must be able to step back and think about what's happening, what has happened, and can this be applied for the future, etc. So these fundamental questions, I think this can still be done to a large degree, also even in remote settings. I think the challenge is, and this is where I think big leadership questions come up. How do you create the same level of trust and confidence in this type of reduced communication environment, right? So how can you, because a lot of things happen informally. What I think works quite well are the formal parts. When you have a team sitting together and working on a subject, right, jointly, and having an agenda and communicating very directly, right? We saw it at the Drucker Forum, by the way. One of the interesting experiences we had at the Drucker Forum was the communication of the panels via this Zoom setting was more direct than if it would have been on the stage. That was a very interesting thing we discovered, and which also was positive for the whole audience, to be able to give inputs regardless where they sat. In the Drucker Forum in Vienna, sometimes they sat in the 40th row, and it was all a bit far away. Now it was all very close. So there are things that work well. Where I'm a bit concerned is all these informal things, because we talk also about informal learning, about the informal type of the relationships and conversations. This is with serendipity. It's not predictable. You cannot plan it like you plan a Zoom call, right? And I think it's underestimated how important this is in companies. When people meet around the water cooler, the famous water cooler in the US, certainly, right? And this informal discussion, I think there need to be a lot of thought going into the question, how can you replicate this in a credible way? What I currently see is nice, but it's by far not the same. Yeah. And these are the big learning opportunities. You talk to somebody from a different department, you hear something, what's happening there, and you start to connect dots that you would have otherwise not connected.
Right. So essentially, if you see the digitalization of the organization grapevine, right? We need to see how is that going to happen in some way.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, as always, you know it in management in all fields. The informal parts tend to be more important than the formal parts, right? Informal. I mean, and there was a good reason that in learning we started to understand explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. And tacit knowledge is built in completely different ways than explicit knowledge. And the opportunities, and that's another example. When you have a mentor, for example, or a coach, you can do things online, obviously. But the question is that really over time the same, right? Is this additional element, which is in a direct personal communication, where much more happens, as we know, than in a pure mediated, technology-mediated conversation? Is that really the alternative? Or how could we still find ways to improve this approach?
Certainly. Shifting gears to, senior leadership and management, almost everyone I speak to is talking about a reprioritization of their own, choices in terms of where they would like to spend their time and effort on. And it seems people are really going back to the basics and saying, I want to spend more time, effort, energy, money on my personal health and well-being, and not just physically but mentally as well. With the increased sort of blurring of the lines between work time or work environment and personal time and personal space, is it now more incumbent on the organizations to take care of the sort of mental fitness, mental well-being of their employees? One, from an altruistic perspective, but also, from the perspective that it is these people who are, talking to clients or in customer service or in sales or doing stuff. And if they are not looked after, you're sitting on a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. I mean, the organizations should have fair practices, and I think they need to review it with a significant push towards new ways of working in virtual settings. I think that needs to be thought through. And we had exactly this discussion at the Drucker Forum, by the way, as well. And so with a very high, let's say, high-level panel, including Andrew Hill from the Financial Times, who chaired it, who is very much dealing with this subject, but also people like Ashok Krish from the Tata, from TCS, who are really doing scientific work on this subject. So I think it's required the fair practices, how to help employees to deal with this subject. I would agree with that. But at the same time, I would get back to Drucker, where to the question about managing yourself, right? The biggest responsibility is with the individual. I think the individual needs to rethink, needs to step back and try to understand the new situation and try to see ways how he or she can cope with it, because the environment of individuals may be quite different and the contextual situation. So I believe it's also a wake-up call for people to say, well, now if I have avoided to deal with myself and my fundamental questions in life, like my health is my responsibility. I cannot just blame it on the company. When the company is not fair and has bad practices, yes, that should, but the company cannot manage all in your sphere. So it's my responsibility, and therefore I think this should be used in the spirit of Peter Drucker, managing oneself.
That's a great point. When we're talking about managing oneself, I think the discussion is now moving towards more and more towards the mental side, right? And we have seen an entire era of people using psychometrics or basically consciousness to try and improve themselves. Do you think it is now the era also of trying to approach the subconscious, the overall self?
You mean for the company
for the individual?
For the individual. Well, I mean, that's very difficult to say in a, let's say, in a general way. I think part of this idea of self-management and self-leadership is that you try to better understand yourself, right? That is a fundamental question, and it seems easy, it seems simple, but it is not. And you cannot, there's no simple single solution. There are, I mean, Drucker has nice ways of explaining it in this famous, it is one of the, I think it's the most read Harvard Business Review article, is Managing Oneself, right? Still a top articles many years after Drucker's death. But the point is that, he made the point that, for example, to understand your strength, you need to see how good you are in really making things happen. And there's an old method that the Jesuits had developed long ago, how to measure that in a very simple way. So I'm just bringing it up because when people come with with the new neurosciences and so, yeah, that's fine. There may be interesting things, but maybe I find something with the Jesuits, and maybe I find something when I go back to spirituality that, India has given us if you remember you think about the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, the Indian spirituality was very important in American management, right?
Absolutely. No, you've really hit on some great points, Richard, and thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure having you, and thank you for sharing your views, and wish you all the best.
You're welcome. Have a good conference.
Thank you.